But wait, what's World of Warships? World of Warships is the naval action MMO, dipping into the world of large-scale sea battles of the first half of the 20th century. Epic battles range across the oceans of the world in order to claim victory among teams comprised of the greatest representatives from an era of multi-ton marine giants. In order to achieve victory in battle, players must enjoy a wide range of strategy and a variety of tactical decisions. Sudden ambushes, cunning flanking attacks, open confrontation, and head-on assaults. Captains must strive to find an ideal way to deliver a decisive blow at the enemy. Tactical diversity in World of Warships comes from the inclusion of many different classes of warships, including aircraft carriers capable of providing remote air support and striking targets at extreme range, colossal battleships that protect power across a vast swath of ocean, and light and heavy cruisers with the capability to respond quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Stealthy and agile destroyers can be highly effective in group attacks. So don't wait. Join World of Warships today for free and rule the oceans.
It's January 1916. World War I consumes Europe. On the Eastern Front, the Russian Empire's Erzurum offensive against the Ottoman Empire has begun, with the Eastern Front defined by a brutal form of mobile combat, resulting in heavy casualties, straining Russia's economic stability and massive food shortages, pushing the Russian people to the brink of revolution. On the Western Front, the Allies had just suffered a major setback, withdrawing from Gallipoli, while in France, the Verdun offensive was getting geared up to try and break the stalemate of trench warfare. The Battle of Verdun will last 10 months, causing over 700,000 casualties and basically ending where it began. Great Britain was still master of the seas as she had been for centuries, their naval might enforcing a naval blockade on Germany. Admiral Reinhard Scheer had just become the new commander of the Kaiserlich Marine. His belief is that the German Navy had been on the defensive for too long. His belief also was the German high seas fleet and its sailors were superior to the British, who have only the numbers game on their side. Scheer's naval strategy is as follows: damage the English fleet by offensive raids against the naval forces engaged in watching and blockading the German Bight, as well as mine laying on the British coast and submarine attack whenever possible. After an equality of strength has been realized, an attempt will be made with our fleet to seek out battle under circumstances unfavorable to the enemy. The German Imperial Admiralty decided to halt attacks by U-boats on merchant shipping, with future attacks to take place under rules that had been agreed to, giving warnings before an attack and allow crews to escape said vessel that was to be torpedoed. Scheer decided to deploy the U-boats against naval targets or military vessels. The plan was that the U-boats would occupy the British destroyers, having to perform anti-sub operations, splitting the Royal Navy into smaller groups that could be taken out one at a time. This would also coerce the British to become overly aggressive, sending smaller and weaker units towards Scheer and his high seas fleet, where he could ambush and destroy them. The subs were given orders to patrol the North Sea between May 17th and the 22nd, and then take up positions to wait on future orders. U-43 and U-44 were stationed at Pentland Firth, a place the Grand Fleet would likely cross, leaving Scapa Flow, while the other 8 were to go to the Firth of Forth, awaiting the battle cruisers that would depart Rosyth. It had been arranged that a transmitted coded signal would be sent to alert the U-boats to commence operations. By the 22nd of May, 1916, the U-boats were starting to experience problems. Visibly near the coast, it was abysmal due to the fog, and the sea would be either slick as glass or raging out of control, with the U-boats either fearful of being spotted or facing seas too rough for periscopes to be used. Also, the British had become aware of the U-boat activity in the vicinity, sending out anti-sub patrols, which forced many U-boats out of position. On a side note, the U-75 was able to lay her mines, and though they had no part in this upcoming battle, the said mines did on June 5th sink the cruiser Hampshire, which was carrying Lord Kitchener, killing him and all but 12 of the Hampshire's crew. The German fleet had assembled in the Jade River and at Wilhelmshaven, instructed to raise steam and prepare battle stations on midnight of the 28th of May. May 31st, a coded signal GG 2490 was sent to the German fleet to prepare for an attack at the Skagerrak on May 31st. The Skagerrak is the area of water between Denmark and Norway at the North Sea. Though the signal was sent via radio station at Bruges and U-boat stations at Emden, only 2 U-boats actually received the order, U-66 and U-32. Unfortunately for the Germans, their plans were deciphered by the code breakers in Room 40 of the British Admiralty, the Royal Navy code breakers. The Royal Navy had ample evidence that the German fleet was going to be stirring in the North Sea. The Admiralty had intercepted Scheer's coded signal GG2490, verifying something was imminent to happen. Admiral John Jellicoe and his staff decided to have the Royal Navy set up to head off any attempt of the German High Seas Fleet to enter the North Atlantic or Baltic Sea and cut off any potential threats that may try to raid merchant shipping. So on May 30th, Admiral John Jellicoe led battleships of the 1st and 4th Battle Squadrons of his Grand Fleet, as well as 3 battle cruisers of the 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron. He was to link up with big gun battle wagons of the 2nd Battle Squadron, led by Vice Admiral Marty Jerram, who was sailing out of Cromarty. Also, they would rendezvous with Admiral David Beatty's force of 6 battle cruisers and 4 fast battleships that were at the Firth of Forth. They were to meet 90 miles west of the Skagerrak, giving them plenty of room to view what the German intent was. The naval tactics in 1916 were trying to modernize by holding on to the old naval traditions and tactics. Powerful ships of the 20th century was still being signaled by a flagman aboard the flagship, as had been done for centuries. Fleet tactics were compact parallel columns, allowing easy maneuvering, easier communication, and making it easier in theory to receive orders from the commanding vessel. Several short columns were the preferred tactics, so the flag or lamp signals from the flagship could be easily seen throughout the fleet, with the flagship placed at the head of the center column, making it easier to see by the whole of the fleet. Early forms of wireless was in use, but the rarity of radio sets made this a problem most times. Thus, command and control of large fleets were still difficult to maintain. Ideally, the fleet's battle columns would essentially cross the T, which means having your fleet lined up broadside in front of an advancing fleet, bringing all your guns to bear on the enemy. Jellicoe achieved this twice during the Battle of Jutland, but could not take full advantage of either one, seeing Scheer disengage both times. A main difference between the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet at Jutland was British battle cruisers sacrificed armor for speed, but the German battle cruisers had sacrificed heavier guns for lighter guns but maintained heavier armor. This was because pre-war Admiral John Fisher of the Royal Navy favored big guns, fuel oil, and speed, while his German counterpart Admiral Tirpitz favored armor for ship survivability. The order of battle at Jutland was as follows. The British had 28 dreadnought battleships to the Germans' 16. The Germans had 6 pre-dreadnought battleships. The British had none. The British had 9 battle cruisers to Germany's 5. Armored cruisers, the British had 8. Germany had none. The British had 26 light cruisers. The Germans had 11. The destroyers were 79 to the British and 61 to the German high seas fleet, while only the British had one seaplane carrier, the British holding the major numerical edge in the order of battle. Admiral John Jellicoe split his grand fleet into two sections. He led the dreadnought battle fleet, composed of 24 big gun battle wagons and 3 battle cruisers. The battleships were further split into squads of 8 ships, then divided into divisions of 4, each leading by a flag officer. Accompanying these divisions were 8 armored cruisers, 8 light cruisers, 4 scout cruisers, 51 destroyers, and 1 mine layer. Admiral David Beatty led the battlecruiser reconnaissance fleet, consisting of 6 battlecruisers, 4 Queen Elizabeth class fast battleships, 14 light cruisers, and 27 destroyers. Also, one of history's first aircraft carriers, HMS Engelmann, provided aerial scouting with its seaplanes. Admiral Scheer had also split his German fleet into a reconnaissance force and main fleet. Scheer's main fleet consisted of 16 battleships, 6 pre-dreadnought ships, 6 light cruisers, 31 torpedo boats, which were basically a small destroyer. Admiral Franz Hipper commanded the German reconnaissance fleet, consisting of 5 battle cruisers, 5 light cruisers, and 30 torpedo boats. They also were trying to use Zeppelins for aerial reconnaissance for the fleet, but it didn't really work. The German main fleet was hamstringed by the slow pre-dreadnought ships. They were only 18 knots at max and having no speed, and were even slight in armor, making them vulnerable to the British Royal Grand Fleet. The U-boats that reported the Royal Fleet's whereabouts to the German fleet were actually incorrect, relaying to the fleet that the Royal Navy was splitting up into separate sections, smaller sections, the exact thing that Scheer was hoping for. But the Royal Navy's departure, seen by the U-boats, was actually David Beatty's battle cruiser squadron, not the whole Grand Seas fleet. Jellicoe's fleet sailed along virtually incognito, but he had also been misled by the Admiralty, being told the German fleet was still at port. Rear Admiral Thomas Jackson had seen the current location of call sign DK, which was Admiral Scheer's call sign, which was still located at Wilhelmshaven, but Scheer used a different call sign when he was at sea, which led to the confusion and the misleading information about where the high seas fleet was, the information from the Admiralty to Admiral Jellicoe. When the German reconnaissance fleet had reached the mouth of the Skagerrak, the main German force was already under full sail, only 50 miles behind Admiral Hipper's fleet. The high seas fleet adopted a line ahead formation with torpedo boats and cruisers screening the battle cruisers. Also to note, visibility was extremely poor, less than 1,000 yards of visibility. The high seas fleet was heading north, and Beatty's battle cruiser squadron was heading east. They were heading towards one another, but 260 miles out, Beatty turned north to meet up with Admiral John Jellicoe and his main battle fleet. At this time, both fleets were in close proximity of one another, the first shots being fired at 14:28 when Galatea and Phaeton of the British Light Cruiser Squadron fired on the German torpedo boats. At 14:36, the Germans scored the first hit when SMS Elbing hit the Galatea at a very long range. Beatty at this time shifted his battle cruisers and support ships southeasterly and then east to cut off the Germans from their base, while having a seaplane from HMS Engelmann to patrol to gather more information about size and actual locations of the German forces. This was the first time a carrier-based plane was used for reconnaissance in a naval battle in history. Admiral Beatty's fleet's cohesion at this time began to falter. His first course changes had not made it to the 5th Battle Squadron battlecruiser HMS Tiger. The last ship in the column had fell out of line unable to relay signals. Beatty, furthermore, didn't concentrate his forces, with his battle lines divided, missing a prime opportunity to have vast numerical advantage at the battle's outset. Admiral Beatty then, for some reason, held his fire for 10 minutes after the German came into range, allowing the Germans to get themselves into firing range. Beatty also didn't arrange his battle cruisers' formations into fighting formations, the fleet still rearranging when the Germans engaged them. The opposing forces were about 15,000 yards parallel with one another, with the Royal Navy southwest of the German fleet. Hipper opened fire first, followed by the British. Beatty chased Hipper to the south. Unbeknownst, Hipper was leading him towards Admiral Scheer's main battle fleet. Beatty attacked in line formation with his flagship HMS Lion engaging Hipper's flagship SMS Lutzow. Quickly, Hipper registered hits on 3 of the 6 British battle cruisers, drawing first blood. It took over 7 minutes for the British to finally get their first hit. The HMS Lion suffered the first major damage of the battle when SMS Lutzow obliterated Q-turret midships during the run south at 1600, thus killing dozens of crew, men mortally wounded. Also, the mortally wounded turret commander, a major, ordered the magazine doors shut, flooding the magazine. This more than likely saved HMS Lion, the water stopping a cordite flash fire at 1628 from igniting the magazine due to it being flooded. HMS Lion got lucky. HMS Indefatigable, not so much. SMS Undertan hit Indefatigable with 3 11-inch shells, detonating X magazine aft. Then a few moments later, a turret was hit, with Indefatigable being ripped apart, with only 2 surviving out of her complement of 1,019 officers and men. By 1615, Hipper's position was in danger when battleship HMS Barham opened fire, hitting Vondertam with a 15-inch shell. At 1625, HMS Queen Mary were hit hard by shells from the Derfflinger and the Seydlitz, causing her magazines to explode, causing her to sink very quickly. Only 9 of her complement of 1,275 crew survived. A witness noted, at 1626, Queen Mary met her doom. A large red flame shot up from her forepart. The arc explosion forward, followed by an even larger explosion midships. She then basically blew apart and sank. During what was called the Run South, the Germans from 1548 to 1654 totaled an estimate of 42 11-inch and 12-inch rounds into the British battle cruisers, compared to only 11 hits by the British on the German fleet. Not long after 1626, a salvo struck Princess Royal, obscuring her in smoke, prompting a signalman to declare on the Lion that the Princess Royal had blown up. Sir. Famously, Admiral Beatty turned to his flag captain, stating, "Chatfield, there seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." Luckily, Princess Royal was still afloat when the smoke cleared, but was heavily damaged and sinking slowly. At 1630, HMS Southampton of Beatty's 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron sighted Scheer's main fleet, the High Seas Fleet, engaging Southampton, firing on her, making her dodge about, trying to bring news back to Beatty to inform him of this. 16 battleships and 6 pre-dreadnoughts. This was the first John Jellicoe and Beatty had heard that the German High Seas Fleet had even sailed. Then all of a sudden, the destroyers from both sides engaged in a melee against one another, causing extensive damage to each other, but really didn't affect the outcome of the battle. At 1640, when Beatty spotted the main High Seas Fleet, he did a 180, heading north to meet up with Jellicoe and his battleship squadrons. called the Run to the North because the Germans now were chasing the British, but Beatty's signals were not making it down the line. And in 1648, Admiral Scheer's battleships opened up fire even though they were still at extremely long range. Jellicoe had received the information, sounded battle stations, because the fleet action that was so longed for was about to happen. At 1651, he informed the Admiralty of this. The next hour saw the 5th Battle Squadron act as Beatty's rear guard, taking repeated fire from the German ships. By 1710, Beatty had moved his squadrons out of range of Hipper's more superior battle cruiser force. The only ships in range now was the 5th Battle Squadron with 3 battleships taking major hits: HMS Bartham, HMS Warspite, and HMS Malaya. Malaya suffered the most damage, but now the Royal Navy was giving as good as she got, scoring 13 hits on 3 of German battle cruisers and 5 battleships, only the SMS Margraf suffering any real damage. Though Jellicoe knew a fleet engagement was imminent, he didn't have info on position and course of the German fleet. Rear Admiral Horace Hood's 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron was southeast in advance of Jellicoe's northern force. Rear Admiral Arbuthnot's 1st Cruiser Squadron, specifically HMS Black Prince, came within view of Beatty's HMS Falmouth, the first visual link of the forming bodies of the Grand Fleet. At 1738, HMS Chester, screening Hood's battlecruisers, ran across German scouting force under Rear Admiral Bodecker. Bodecker's 4 light cruisers pounded Chester until Hood swung west to relieve HMS Chester. Hood's flagship, HMS Invincible, hit and disabled the light cruiser SMS Wiesbaden. Shortly after 1756, Bodecker retreated back toward the main German high seas fleet, thinking that Admiral Hood was leading a much larger force. German torpedo boats tried their luck yet again, only scoring 1 hit on a destroyer, HMS Shark. Having several ships damaged, Hipper turned towards Scheer's fleet around 1800. At the same time, Beatty's flagship, HMS Lion, was spotted by Jellicoe's flagship, HMS Iron Duke. 2 times Jellicoe demanded information on the German fleet's whereabouts, Beatty not responding until 1814. Jellicoe was also receiving conflicting reports about ships on the southern flank of his force, not knowing if it was true or not. Jellicoe was under immense pressure. He needed to know the location of the German high seas fleet so he could deploy his battleships in the fashion they needed to be, then out of cruising formation, either to the west or to the east. He had pros and cons on which way he deployed, easterly or westerly. This was one of the single most difficult command decisions made during the entire First World War. At 1815, Jellicoe deployed to the east. Hipper then joined Scheer, and they were steaming north straight toward Jellicoe's Grand Fleet, having no idea that Jellicoe had even sailed. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy had several near misses trying to reorganize into battle formations with ships almost colliding. HMS Defense and Warrior almost rammed Beatty's ship, HMS Lion, as well as other ships having the same problems. This would be known as the Windy Corner. At this time, HMS Defense and HMS Warrior spotted the crippled Wiesbaden and steamed toward her for an easy kill, but suddenly HMS Defense was showered with shells from Scheer's high seas fleet until she exploded, sinking with all hands, 903 men and crew. Warrior was also hit, but an old wound that kept crippling the Warspite throughout her career struck her in her steering gear, which had become stuck from being jammed and overheated, inadvertently sending Warspite into a circle, drawing the fire from the German high seas fleet battleships, thus giving Warrior a reprieve. Warspite, though, had taken 13 hits, but still was able to escape, readily damaged, but not dead in the water. Warspite withdrew from the battle. The Warrior would sink the next day. Around 1820, the Grand Fleet opened up on Hipper's ships with Indomitable hitting Derblinger 3 times and Seydlitz once, while Lion, Inflexible, and Invincible opened up on the Lutzow, landing 10 hits. Though damaged, at 1830, the Lutzow and Derblinger started firing back, firing 3 salvos and Invincible, which sank her in 90 seconds. Only 6 of her complement of 1,032 men survived, with Rear Admiral Hood being one of the deceased. The SMS Lutzow started to flood from her major damage, forcing Hipper to transfer his flag to a torpedo boat, SMS Jeep-39, to later board another battlecruiser. Around 1830, Jellicoe had gained the naval tactical edge, finally able to cross the T on the German high seas fleet. Scheer and his officers were taken aback, seeing the raw power and the full might of the Grand Fleet. Iron Duke scored 7 hits quickly on SMS Koenig, and only 10 of Jellicoe's dreadnoughts actually opened fire. Scheer disengaged the death trap at 1833, yelling, "Battle about, turn to starboard," a well-practiced emergency move of the high seas fleet. Jellicoe didn't directly pursue. He headed south, keeping the high seas fleet to his west. Scheer knew he couldn't retreat without suffering major damage until nightfall came, so he reversed his course to screen the British, trying to keep them on the back foot. At 1915, Jellicoe had effectively crossed the T once again with tighter and deadlier formations, and severely damaging the SMS Koenig, the Grossier Kurfürst, the Margraf, and Kaiser, as well as SMS Helgoland of the 1st Squadron. Only HMS Colossus was hit 2 times with no real damage. A second time, Scheer veered away from Jellicoe, not engaging, using his battle about turn formation. Scheer, fearing the British would chase him, sacrificed his battle cruisers and torpedo boats in an all-out attack to allow his main fleet to retreat. Derblinger, under Captain Hartog, led these ships into the greatest concentration of naval gunfire any fleet commander had ever faced, at ranges as close as 4 miles. Known as the Death Ride, all the battle cruisers except the Moltke suffered multiple hits, being further damaged as 18 British big gun battle wagons opened up on them in 20 minutes. The Germans had sustained 37 devastating hits while only giving 2 hits on the British. Scheer and Hipper were able to retreat away from the Grand Fleet, though. At 2100, Jellicoe was avoiding any night engagements due to his men's lack of experience. Jellicoe and his commanders didn't realize that the gunfire explosions to the north was actually Scheer breaking through the screen astern the British fleet. This night engagement only added to the confusion of the Battle of Jutland. Finally, at 5:20 in the morning, Scheer's fleet was making full steam on the way home. The Admiralty had failed to pass along critical information to Jellicoe, informing him and indicating of the position, course, and the intentions of the German high seas fleet. Both fleets eventually claimed victory at Jutland, both having fulfilled some of their objectives, but not all of them. The Battle of Jutland, in my opinion, was a tactical win for the German high seas fleet, but yet it was a strategic win for the British Grand Fleet. The High Seas Fleet inflicted greater damage on the Grand Fleet, but was basically a paper tiger until the war's end, only having 2 sorties after this battle to try and raid and break out, with no real backbone to them. Scheer, knowing the Grand Fleet was still right there, the British tightened the blockade, and Germany went back to unrestricted warfare with their U-boats, eventually one of the reasons that caused the U.S. to enter World War I. The loss of the battle cruisers did cause the Royal Navy to batten down the hatches, so to speak, and it came to a boiling point when the Hood met the Bismarck in World War II, seemingly suffering the same fate as Queen Mary, indefatigable and invincible. The total losses on both sides were: the British loss of life was 6,784 men. The Germans lost 3,039 men. The British had 113,300 tons of military shipping sank. The Germans suffered 62,300 tons of shipping sank. The British ships lost were from Beatty's fleet: Indefatigable, Queen Mary, the destroyer Turbulent, Nomad, Nelther, and other ships: Invincible, the Black Prince, Warrior, Defense, as well as the Shark, Sparrowhawk, Ardent, and Fortune, and the Tipperary, which were destroyers. The Germans lost the battlecruiser Lutzow, the dreadnought, pre-dreadnought Pommern, light cruisers Freiburg, Elbing, Rostock, and Westbaden, destroyers V-48, S-35, V-27, V-4, and V-29. This was the last major fleet-to-fleet engagement to happen on the high seas by big gun battle wagons. World War II saw the aircraft carrier basically obsolete the battleship. The Battle of Jutland was an indecisive affair, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. Opportunities squandered and lost, and the falter of the battle cruiser's design was evident in this battle. I, though, give this to the British, since they were able to maintain their blockade until war's end, thus basically keeping the German high seas fleet in their hold and being basically a non-factor in World War I. Thank you for listening. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the noti bell, hit the like button. It really does the channel good. I really would appreciate it. And thank you for listening. This is Big Dude 6 from CoolKegs Studios. Until next time, Civis Pacem Parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war.